That looks okay. Begin. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahavidyan Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om. Good. Good. Welcome to you all. Welcome also to all of you watching this or attending this satsang online. We have a lot of good questions. Before we take your questions, there's just something I'm a little concerned about. In last week's satsang, we had a question from Prashanto, who writes often from Bangladesh. And I made reference to the fact that in Sanskrit, his name is Prashanta and becomes Prashanto in Bengali. I'm afraid that he or someone might have thought that I'm making fun of Bengali language. I'm actually rather fond I find it endearing, Bengali language. I hope none of you thought, and especially Prashanto, I hope you didn't think I was making fun of his names. That's kind of a trigger point for some people. So it turns out, I don't know if you've ever listened to old recordings of Rabindranath Tagore reciting his own poetry in Bengali. Even though I don't follow, I can follow some Hindi. I can't follow Bengali at all. I still find his poetry electrifying. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that. Okay, this is all working fine. And we begin. First question from Vishaka. She writes, you always say emotions are what makes us human. Absolutely. And anger is one such emotion. Before we proceed, when I make that argument, emotions are natural, emotions are human, doesn't mean they're all okay. When I say it natural, infants are not potty trained. That's natural. Is it okay? That's my point. So natural means natural. Doesn't mean it's acceptable, especially in adults. All right. So Vishka continues. With the help of Vedantic teachings, my emotional outbursts have come under control. Excellent. In terms of not resorting to angry words or actions in response. Outwardly, I can stay quiet, but my mind starts thinking negatively, which is natural. You once said not to take the mind seriously. We need to just put that in context. I said your mind doesn't truly affect your essential nature as consciousness. I also said your mind will never be perfect. Sometimes you just have to put up with it. But it doesn't mean to have this, in English we say anything goes attitude. Hindi mein chalta hai. So that's not okay. So whatever the mind does, we have to deal with it pragmatically, let us say. Don't take the mind too seriously, but don't ignore it either. Take it pragmatically. So she asks her question, is there a better way to handle your emotions when encountering a person who constantly presses your buttons? Can we quell the anger altogether, even when someone bullies us or does something that is irritating? In the long run, Vedanta will transform your understanding of yourself so completely that you won't feel threatened by the person. And if you don't feel threatened by the person, will anger arise? Not at all. So that's the long-term solution. In the short term, you have to do exactly what Vishaka is doing. We hold those emotions back. That's what adults do, right? Children don't know how to hold back. It all comes out. But as adults, we learn to hold back. Is there any better way to handle those emotions? That's in the realm of psychology. She mentions buttons. Some people have buttons, tender points, which means unresolved, to use the language of psychology, unresolved emotional traumas from your childhood. That's what a therapist would say. If you have unresolved emotional trauma from your childhood that remains unresolved, then maybe you, and it's causing you to react with anger, then maybe you have to deal with it. Maybe you have to see a therapist. I'm not suggesting that Vishaka needs a therapist. I'm just saying, if there are significant underlying unresolved emotional issues that make it difficult for you to handle your emotions, in such a case, a professional might be able to help you. Okay, next question from Arun, who lives in Bangalore. Arun says, I'm given to understand that an individual is expected to be non-competitive to advance on the spiritual path. I understand the sentiment, but I'm not sure that I completely agree with the way it's expressed. One thing that's absolutely true is that once you've been on the spiritual path for a while, the extreme competitiveness that many people have, it goes away. It goes away for several reasons. One is it goes away because you have your eye on a more important goal. Competition means there's a goal you want to achieve. If that's your only goal in life, how competitive are you going to be in seeking that goal? But when that goal is one of many in your lives, and when your foremost goal is spiritual growth, how will that transform competitiveness? You'll still compete, but not with, can I use the word fanaticism? Why not? You can compete without being a fanatic. So anyway, this is just a comment on his question. An individual is expected to be non-competitive to advance on the spiritual path. I just rephrased it in a more nuanced way. So, Arun's question, how should a sadhaka, a spiritual aspirant, apply these spiritual values to a competitive work environment when working in, especially when participating in competitive sports? Why not? You can have someone who is a very intense spiritual aspirant and also competes in competitive sports. I don't see any conflict whatsoever. In fact, in my opinion, the more Vedanta goes in, the better a competitor you'll be. Some of you, if you haven't, there's a video I did long ago, I think something on spiritual journey or journey of spiritual growth. It's a 2-part video. And in that video, I give this wonderful poker game analogy. It's a lovely analogy. It's a story. It's an anecdote. Let me share the anecdote with you now. When I was in college, it was an engineering college in the 1970s. I think almost all male, all men in those days. Nowadays, quite different. Anyway, we had a poker game every Friday evening. And in that poker game, by the way, the engineering college was in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Milwaukee is famous for beer. And in those poker games, we'd play a lot of poker and we'd drink a lot of beer. That was what we did. And I used to enjoy it, and we used to play for nickels and dimes, and it was just for fun. You have to make a wager, otherwise poker it's not fun. So you make a wager. Over a period of time, where this poker game went on for years, over a period of time, the stakes went up. It was no longer nickels and dimes, and it was occasionally $1 or $2. It got to a point where there were $10 bills and I was a poor college student in the 1970s. $10 was a big deal. And what I found is, as the stakes went up, I enjoyed the game less. Interestingly, I drink less beer also. Because beer makes your mind fuzzy, and there's a lot of strategy in this game of poker. So anyway, and I eventually dropped out of the game altogether. It made me then, years later, when I was studying Vedanta, it made me reflect on the fact that we tend to look at life as a high-stakes poker game, where you can't afford to lose, and it's no fun. Poker is supposed to be fun. But if you're playing for high stakes, it becomes quite serious. Big consequences. To me, a life of spiritual growth, and the teachings of Advaita, Vedanta in particular, convert your view of life into seeing it as a low stakes poker game. Then what's significant about this metaphor is this. When the stakes were low, this is why I love that metaphor so much. When the stakes were low, did I play to lose? Did I play casually? In fact, I used the best strategy I could. I played to win because that's fun when the stakes were low. So my argument here is that spiritual life makes your spiritual growth, converts your life into what I call a low-stakes poker game, but it doesn't mean you don't care anymore. If the stakes are low, you don't just throw out any old card, you play to win. But you play to win with joy in your heart, not fear, right? In a high-stakes poker game, you're saying, oh God, what is that guy going to... Is that guy bluffing? If you know anything about poker. Is that guy bluffing or not? Should I hold or should I fold? These are the terms we use. Anyway, you get the idea. Lovely metaphor. If you can, look at that old video, a journey of spiritual growth or something. Journey of enlightenment, I think. 2 parts. Next question from Tapan. Tapan lives in Pune. Tapan writes, if someone is trying to meditate for past 4 years and couldn't progress much, does this mean that he or she has any karmic blockage which is preventing the progress, or is the technique and willpower he or she is using, is it not correct or not enough? Karmic blockage, to be honest, a proper understanding of the doctrine of karma doesn't include this idea of blockage. Doctrine of karma says certain events in your life take place which are the fructification of deeds you did in the past. Not exactly karmic blockage. I think this idea of karmic blockage might be kind of like a new age kind of idea, I'm thinking. It's not really true to the way the doctrine of karma was originally envisioned. On the other hand, due to your karma, you might find it easier to due to your past karmas and due to who you are today, you might find it easier to learn how to meditate. You might find it more difficult, or born of karma. But the main thing, the main obstacle for people is really proper instruction and proper effort. Meditation is a learned skill. A skill that anyone can learn. Maybe not easy. Tell me, could you learn how to perform brain surgery? Now think twice. Why not? If you went to school for 12 years and had proper training and proper effort, you could learn how to perform brain surgery. Why not? Normal dexterity is enough. And nowadays they have all these robotics that they use. So you don't even need to have that dexterity anymore. Anyway, meditation is a learned skill. You can certainly learn how to do it. Okay, Next question from Rama. Rama lives in Maryland, United States. How is the karana sharira different from Atma? First of all, what is karana sharira? Sharira means body. In Advaita Vedanta, we differentiate between stula sharira, physical body, and sukshma sharira, which is the sum total of what enlivens your physical body. Sukshma sharira then includes prana, life force. It includes your mind, it includes your sense faculties, all your powers of walking and talking, etc. All of this collectively is part of sukshma sharira, subtle body. But not when we call it sharira, body, it's figurative. Figurative because your physical body is obviously a body. The subtle body doesn't have the shape of a physical body. In fact, it doesn't have any shape whatsoever. So to call subtle body body is a figurative usage of the word body or sharira. And the same is true for karana sharira, which is what Ram asks about. Causal body. So first of all, it's not a body. It's only, that's a figurative usage. Karana means cause. And in Advaita Vedanta, karana sharira is the cause for the physical and subtle body. The cause because of which you were born as an individual person with a stula sharira and a sukshma sharira. And this is a big topic. I'm just going to give you the outline. In Advaita Vedanta, if you've understood these teachings properly, what is the cause for your rebirth? Karana sharira is the cause for the birth of the stula and sukshma sharira. So according to Advaita Vedanta, why do you get born in the first place? The one word answer to that question, the long answer is quite involved. The one word answer is ignorance. You're not enlightened. If you were enlightened, you wouldn't get reborn. If you're not enlightened, it's because of ignorance. In particular, it's due to ignorance of your true nature as Satchidananda Atma. So, how is karana sharira different from Atma? Karana sharira is ignorance, as properly understood in Advaita Vedanta. How it's different from Atma is, I think, pretty obvious. I think the question arises only when karana sharira is not understood. Second part of Ram's question, how are vasanas carried over from the next janma through the karana sharira? Now this is taught by some modern teachers of Vedanta, that the karana sharira is somehow an embodiment of vasanas, impressions left over from your prior lives. Karana sharira is an embodiment of vasanas, impressions left over from prior lives. Notice that's not the same as the definition I just used. I said karana sharira is ignorance. But here he's making reference to karana sharira as being an embodiment of past vasanas. This is what's taught in Yoga Vasishta, of which is another approach to Advaita Vedanta, but highly different from Shankaracharya's approach. And I've studied Yoga Vasishta in quite a bit of depth, and I find it unhelpful. I find it introduces lots of esoteric ideas which are confusing. To say that the karana sharira is an embodiment of past vasanas is a overcomplication of the issue. And I find that throughout the Yoga Vasishta. It takes simple things and makes them more complicated, more confusing. There's a principle, not just in Advaita Vedanta, but in all philosophy called laghavam. In Western philosophers use the term Occam's razor. And it's a principle that says the least complicated way of explaining something is correct. The more complicated you make something, you make it less correct. So based on this principle, what Shankara teaches, and our whole tradition, the tradition of Advaita Vedanta that I've been trained in and that I teach is completely based on Shankaracharya's approach, and it differs quite a bit from the approach used in Yoga Vasishta. So instead of saying that karana sharira is an embodiment of vasanas left over from prior lifetimes, I think that's an extremely unhelpful definition of karana sharira. Shankara's definition is so much more clear, and it works. It works perfectly fine. Anyway, to go further into the yoga, I don't want to teach you all about Yoga Vasishta here. What are vasanas and how are they embodied by the karana sharira? Instead of getting into all of that, let's just say it's not as helpful as Shankara's approach. Okay, another question from, excuse me. This question is from Suraj and Prasanna, who live in California. It says, we grew up with stories featuring a familiar pattern. An asura, a demon, performs intense tapasya, penances, and undergoes severe austerities to attain a boon. And then the question, some expansion here, I'll give you the short form. However, don't spiritual teachings emphasize that for a great yogi, you have to transcend worldly desires? It's quite lengthy, so let me paraphrase some of this. If these asuras were... Okay, it's quite lengthy. This idea, in scriptures, especially in the Puranas, that category of scriptures, lots of stories, not just of asuras attaining these powers, but even human beings attaining amazing powers through spiritual practice. You know, good example in Ramayana is Ravana. What power he had. How? He was a great Shiva Bhakta. through his meditation on Lord Shiva and through his intense austerities, Ravana became so powerful. So then how to reconcile the use of spiritual practice to attain these powers, but then we use spiritual practice, I thought, for the sake of enlightenment. Well, then what is the Puranas teaching us? And this is tricky. These stories come, not in Puranas, I just gave example from Ramayana. Also Mahabharata, lots of stories of attaining siddhis, special powers, as a result of spiritual practice. Obviously, attaining siddhis is not the purpose of spiritual practice according to Advaita Vedanta. And this is such a delightful story, I have to tell it. The idea of attaining siddhis in Advaita Vedanta is expressed by this wonderful old story, been retold many times, about a fellow who meditated so much that he could walk on water. He attained the siddhi, a special power of being able to walk on water. Okay, not like Jesus. So Jesus was God, so God can do anything. So this is different. This is a human being attaining a siddhi. So anyway, the story goes, this fellow was meditating on the banks of a river, And there was a pilgrim who came to the river, and he paid there was a ferry to get across the river, so he gave the guy 1 or 2 pennies, and he got across the river on the ferry boat. He gets to the other side and sees that meditating guy walking across the water. And he gets to the other side, and the pilgrim is amazed. How did you do that? And the guy explains, I've been meditating for decades and performing intense austerities. And now look, I can even walk on water. The pilgrim thinks about it for a moment and says, really? You spent decades practicing so that you can walk on, to get across this river? I just gave the ferry boat guy 1 or 2 paisa. he took me across. Isn't that a great story? It really puts these siddhis in perspective from an Advaita Vedanta standpoint. Then, why do the Puranas and Ramayana and Mahabharata tell all these stories? The stories are told in a perspective. That is, yes, you can achieve all these siddhis, but so what? You attain all the siddhis and then you die. Or, just in a very pragmatic sense, suppose you could walk on water. You attain that siddhi. But you've got a really bad headache. How does that siddhi help you with your bad headache? Get my point? So yes, these stories about siddhis come in all the scriptures, but the siddhis are never represented as the goal, as something that might be achievable through some kind of spiritual practice, but not ultimately the goal. I'll mention just in passing that not just in Puranas and Mahabharata, Ramayana, but in Yoga Sutras, the sage Patanjali devotes an entire chapter to the attainment of siddhis, using yogic practices, meditative practices, for the sake of gaining siddhis. But he also says that that's not the goal. You can achieve these siddhis, but really speaking, in fact, he suggests, and commentators make it on the Yoga Sutra make it very clear, that it's a distraction. Actually, they call it a distraction to gaining enlightenment, to get fascinated with these siddhis. Okay. Let's take one more question here, then we'll take some questions from our local students. This question from Amit, who lives in India. I'm sorry, Amit, I would just ask you, please rewrite, it's quite long, and it's helpful if the questions are a little short, more concise. Amit, please rewrite your question in just 1 or 2 sentences. I read it twice, I'm not quite getting it. So short questions are easier to handle in a satsang situation. This question from Narendra. Narendra doesn't say where he lives. Narendra is talking about the relationship between various kinds of karma, sanchita karma, prarabdha karma, agami karma, and the evolving inherent nature, swabhava, that my subtle body carries at birth and death. Okay. And then he goes on to refer to the doctrine of karma. By the way, if these words aren't familiar to you, and if you don't have a clear understanding of the technicalities of the doctrine of karma, you might find it really helpful to learn. And on my YouTube channel, there's a playlist on the doctrine of karma, a couple of short videos. If you go through those videos, you will understand the doctrine of karma very clearly. I'm not going to go through it all here. So he comes to some questions like, He says, is it like this? Is it that karmas determine the entry point of my subtle body in its physical form, which is a complicated way of saying that, yes, your karmas determine the circumstances of your birth. When were you born? To which family were you born? What is the nature of your body? And to some extent, what is the nature of your mind as well? All of that is determined by prarabdha karma. Now, the essence of his question is in the next point. The evolution of nature, swabhava. Swabhava is a term that refers to your swabhava, literally means one's own nature, which is determined by karma. Does that swabhava decide the direction and momentum of the cyclical course through the physical and subtle forms, which is a complicated way of saying, is your life fixed according to the circumstances of your birth? Swabhava means the circumstances of your birth, the result of karma. Is your life determined by that? Absolutely not. What about free will? The doctrine of karma is actually built on free will. Karmas are accumulated through willful actions. The doctrine of karma is based on free will. So yes, you are born according to your prarabdha karma, but then how your life evolves from there is based, now listen carefully, it's based partially on karma and partially on free will, both. Not one or the other, both. Partially on karma, because depending on the circumstances of your birth, I was born a small, gift is my bad example, not bad. I was born a small child, and I grew up to only 5'4" of height. So based on my karma, how do you think I would have done if I wanted to be a professional basketball player? So, no matter how much free will I would have exerted, I would never become a professional basketball player. Good thing I'm a Swami, and you get the point. So, free will is not almighty. You get the point. Free will is limited. So, whatever evolves in life is not purely swabhava, it's also free will. Not purely karma, both free will and karma. Okay. Do we have some questions here today? Any questions? A question here. You'll need the microphone, please.
Is it on? Puji Swamiji, a simple question. Not that I'm a grandfather. How do I explain or begin to explain to the child through various stages perhaps, but in the beginning stage, even simple question like, what's a Hindu? Who is Hindu? Is it a tradition? Is it a religion? What should I be following? I mean, it's very, very simple.
Sure.
In terms of, later stages, perhaps it could get more complicated. But initially, how do you start? Do you even start a child with a prayer, learning a prayer?
Those are all good questions. The key to teaching any child is age-appropriate education. So before you teach a child who is a Hindu, you teach your child who is God, what is prayer, what are some rituals. So you don't even talk about Hinduism. You just say, these are the forms of God we pray to. You teach the child some prayers, how to pronounce their prayers. You teach and gradually you develop those ideas to the idea of God as being all-powerful, almighty God, because of whom we all exist. And hopefully you use with a Hindu child, you use the word Bhagavan or Ishvara instead of God. And you gradually bring the child up through religious practice. Only later, when that child, a 4-year-old child can sit in front of an altar and pray. But you're not going to try to teach the child the origin and nature of Hindu religion. So that will come later. So in a very organic way, and skillful teachers know this very well, and also you know this very well. Whatever you teach the child, if it's age appropriate, it works. So you bring the child up, and if you focus on practice, what is the... If you focus on practice instead of theory, you're just like when you were a student, which was more meaningful to you? What you in the classroom, your chemistry professor is writing all these complicated formula on the board, gave you a headache, but then when you went into the lab, you might have enjoyed that. So you put the emphasis on practice with a child, not on theory. And that obviously applies to not teaching a child anything about Advaita Vedanta. It's not age appropriate. So you start with, I don't know how else to explain it, just simple, organic. Start with prayers, start with who are we praying to, and let that evolve in a very natural, organic way. Do you have a follow-up to that question?
So, follow-up is really the age-old question for Hinduism, right? Okay, I'm praying to Krishna. Should I also be praying to Ganesh? And should I also be praying to this? And why am I praying to multiple gods? I mean, these questions will come up, follow up.
Yeah,
I just want to be ready for it.
Got it. So you're making an interesting point. So child, you got one picture here is Lord Krishna, another is Lord Shiva, another is Goddess Devi, and over here is Saraswati, Lakshmi. You got this whole row of pictures, and you better be ready to explain that, just like teachers need to be skillful. Your chemistry professor was skillful, learned how to teach. You, raising your children and grandchildren, need to educate yourself about how to teach. Teaching is not inborn. In fact, this is a problem. When people teach without knowing how to teach, that happens all the time, and it's a disaster. So learn how to teach. And in terms of how to teach the child, how do we, if God is one, this idea, Hindus pray one God in many forms. So you need to, if you're a skillful teacher, you'll know how to present that in a way that children can understand. You can understand. I hope you can understand. We pray one God in many forms. How to make a child understand, the way I used to explain, I used to teach children. I enjoyed for years teaching children. Really, I did. And I would tell the child would ask, how do we pray one God in all these forms? And I'd ask the child, the question would usually begin, is there really one God? And then I'd ask this child, how many mothers do you have? One. Okay? What do you call her? If the child is an American, Mom. All right, you call her Mom. When your father comes home from work, does he say, hi, Mom, I'm home? And the child giggles, no. The child says, my dad calls her honey. Good. And then when your mom, so suppose your grandmother is visiting, mother's mother, does she call her your mother? Does she say mom or honey? Maybe honey, but no, probably by her name, or daughter, or beta, beti, this kind of language. Fine. And then when she goes to the bank, how do they address your mother? Mom? Beta? No, they use Mrs. So-and-so. Okay. So then I asked the child, and this is just to illustrate. I asked the child, how many, we just got four. We got one mom, we got one honey, we got one daughter, and we got one Mrs. Patel, for example. You said you have one mother. And it clicks. Mom plays many roles. Bhagavan has many roles. Bhagavan is creator. We call him Brahma, Brahmaji. Bhagavan is sustainer, Vishnu. Bhagavan is giver of wealth, Lakshmi, giver of wisdom, Saraswati. So you age appropriate, but you need, if you're going to teach your children, teach yourself how to teach your children or grandfather or grandchildren, because teaching is a skill. And if you are not a skillful teacher, you're not going to do as good of a job as you might otherwise do. Okay. Any other questions here? One more question. You'll need the microphone.
Namaste, Swamiji. It's not actually a question in the sense I am a student of your Vedanta course and I'm visiting this country from Coimbatore. So I just wanted to say I'm so grateful for the course. It's helping me a lot. And this gentleman's question is very relevant because I'm going to become a grandmother in December.
Congratulations.
And, thank you. And this course is helping me get that focus and clarity. Yes. And I find that all my, the negative emotions I had, jealousy, competitiveness, anger, is slowly leaving me.
It works.
Yeah, and it's helping me a lot. So I just
Wonderful.
wanted to say thank you very much.
That's delightful.
Namaste.
Thank you. Thank you for your kind comments. That's really nice. Okay, we got some other, before we run out of time, we got some other, and welcome to you. That's really nice. Some other questions here. Yeah. Okay, next question from Pramod. Pramod lives in Gurgaon. Is rebirth a continual improvement plan? Like working on your house, right? You ever live in an old house and you have to go on improving your house? Is rebirth an improvement plan? In general, no, because there's no guarantee you pick up the thread where you left off. There's no guarantee that your next birth will even be as a human being. There's no guarantee. It's possible, but there's no guarantee. Anything is possible, but there's no guarantee. But Pramod makes reference to a teaching in the Bhagavad Gita. At the end of chapter 6, Arjuna asks the question about the yoga bhrashta, someone who has taken to a spiritual life, but then fails to gain enlightenment in that life. And Arjuna asks Sri Krishna, does it mean all their effort is lost? They have to start over. Do you remember those board games that, what is it, Chutes and Ladders? You go all the way back, or in or something, you go back to Go, Snakes and Ladders. I don't remember. Or this Monopoly, you go back to Go or go to jail, these kind of things. Yeah, Snakes and Ladders, you go back to the beginning. Then how is it, if anything is possible in your next rebirth, how is it then that Sri Krishna tells Arjuna, no, if you have been devoted to spiritual life. Anything? Oh, thank you. Oh, that's very helpful. Yeah, I keep forgetting to put the camera back. That's very helpful. So how to explain? Arjuna says, does that person who has worked so diligently in spiritual life but fails to get enlightenment in the next in this lifetime, do they have to start over and get born as a cockroach and work their way up again? And Sri Krishna assures Arjuna, no, in that special case, and it is a special case, in that special case, that person is far more likely to be reborn in a situation conducive to his or her continued spiritual life, picking up the thread in the next life, in that special case. And the way we explain that special case is through a complicated part of the doctrine of karma that acknowledges that you might have a samskara, a mental impression from a prior life that is so powerful that it travels along with your sukshma sharira from one life to the next. And because of that samskara, that spiritual samskara, travels into the next life and therefore molds your life from childhood on. But that kind of samskara is only formed through tremendous intensity of your activities in life. Some people will give whether this is true or not, I don't know, but there are some child prodigies who can play piano like anything as a young child. Mozart was on tour in Europe giving recitals in big theaters when he was 7 years of age. Go figure. Child prodigy. So there are some people who think, we don't know, that maybe child prodigies are born as a result of this samskara. But again, special case. Mozart was a special case. And someone that Sri Krishna is speaking about at the end of chapter 6, that yoga brashta, special case. All right. I think just another question or two here. This question is from Vishwajit, who also lives in Bangalore. Buddha is generally considered to have attained enlightenment, no reason to doubt. Yet from an Advaita Vedanta perspective, his negation of the Vedas, he did, by the way, he denied the authoritativeness of the Vedas, and his agnosticism about God, which is also true. The story goes, does God exist? And the story goes, his disciple asks Buddha, does God exist? He didn't say anything. Does God not exist? He didn't say anything. Does God both exist and not exist? Buddha didn't say anything. Does God neither exist nor not exist? This is Buddhist logic, lots of logic in Buddhism. Buddha remained quiet. So Vishwajit correctly describes Buddha himself as being agnostic. Of course, his followers interpreted his silence in many ways, and certainly in Tibetan Buddhism, for example, they have arguably more deities than Hindus have. Lots. Anyway, that's beside the point. Buddha himself was agnostic. And that makes, and Vishwajit says, that makes Vishwajit a Nastika. By the way, Nastika, unbeliever, be careful now. The Hindu definition of non-believer is not someone who doesn't believe in God. It's actually one who doesn't believe in the Vedas. It's a subtle distinction, because it's possible to follow the Vedas without really being focused on Ishvara. You can be focused on rituals in a very mechanical way without being focused on prayer and worship, and certainly without being focused on Advaita Vedanta. So the definition of Nastika, non-believer in the Hindu tradition, is one who doesn't accept the validity of the Vedas. Okay. Vishwajit continues, it appears his enlightenment would be considered false from an Advaita Vedanta perspective. Why? I'll answer that. Even if his analysis of the human condition gels with Advaita Vedanta, is his truth somehow then partial or differential? I don't think there's any reason to doubt Buddha being enlightened. It's true that he didn't accept the Vedas. He was agnostic with regard to God, but yet he managed to get enlightened. He managed. How unusual. Buddha was Buddha for a reason. Another, like Mozart was a child prodigy, Buddha was some kind of prodigy. He was some kind of rare individual who managed to get enlightened more or less on his own through meditation. A rare individual. Buddha didn't have the advantage that you and I have. We have the advantage of a tradition that teaches us how to pray, how to meditate on various forms of God, and more than anything else, we have a tradition that gives us the methodical teachings of Advaita Vedanta. Buddha didn't have all those advantages. Buddha didn't need all those advantages. We do. He didn't need them. So, even though Buddha didn't have access to the kind of Vedantic teaching methodology that he didn't follow the teaching methodology we follow. He didn't need it. We need it. Now, there's a consequence for this. So, is Buddha enlightened? Yes. Is he enlightened because he followed Advaita Vedanta? No. He's a rare case, a special case. But that also leads to another observation. And the observation is this. Buddha, having rejected the authoritativeness of the Vedas, that include the Upanishads, that include the teachings of Vedanta we follow, Buddha then, when he taught his disciples, he was teaching his own, in American English, he was teaching his own thing, a nice American English. He was teaching what worked for him. And what worked for him was this meditation and some analysis. He a lot of his own kind of analysis and a lot of meditation. It worked for him. Here's the problem. It worked for him, but he was a genius. Will it work for others? I would say if others were a genius like him, it would work. But if you're not a genius, maybe it won't work. That's why I say this again and again because it's so important. What's unique about Advaita Vedanta is not what it teaches, but how it teaches. It has this incredibly powerful teaching methodology that can lead you step by step to gain the wisdom and enlightenment that Buddha got through his amazing inherent proficiency, something special about him. So, important distinction to be made. We'll take one more question and wrap up for today. This question comes from Amita, who lives in Mauritius, large Hindu community in Mauritius, I think largely 8 million, South Indian. Amita asks, please explain the meaning of Om Tat Sat. So Om Tat Sat is an ancient expression. Sri Krishna actually talks about it in the Bhagavad Gita, and its conventional usage is at the end of any prayer. Om Tat Sat. Its meaning is very simple. Om is an invocation of Ishvara or of Brahman. Om. Tat is a pronoun that, and Sat in this context means true. It simply means Tat Sat. That is the truth. So when you finish a prayer, you end Om Tat Sat, because whatever you've expressed in your prayer is the truth. And the prayers you've recited is truth. And when I finish this satsang in just a few moments, I end Om Tat Sat. It's a conventional way to end any kind of sadhana, any kind of spiritual practice. Simply, literally it means Om, that is the truth. Symbolically, a little bit more, because it represents the source of the truth. And the source of the truth is indicated by Om. Om is a name for Bhagavan. So Om Tat Sat, this is the truth, and that truth is, we are blessed with this truth by Bhagavan. So all of that is implied by Om Tat Sat. So, as questions, more next week. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhavet Asato Ma Satgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityor Ma Amritangamaya. Om Shanti 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 Om Tat Sat. See you next week.